Good morning. This is the Committee on Health and Homelessness. Today is Wednesday, November 29, 2023. We are in conference room 329 and also on YouTube, the House YouTube channel. And we have participants also via Zoom. It is 9:00 a.m. in rainy Honolulu, Hawaii. Members, thank you for joining us. This is our third of a series of briefings on homelessness programs across the state. We actually started in early November with other hearings that also touched upon homelessness with the state Medicaid office and the 1115 waiver and some exciting things and developments happening to address homelessness in Hawaii. This really is a whole of government approach. This past Monday, we had the state coordinator on homeless and housing solutions here to talk about some of his efforts with Kauhale, Ohana zones, as well as the permanent supportive housing pilot program that the legislature passed this session. We've had representatives from the City and County of Honolulu Core Services. And before that, we also had individuals speaking to us about substance abuse, telehealth, all kinds of things that actually really help and inform our whole of government approach to homelessness. Today, we're focusing on the really kind of the core of homeless programs, offices, services, through the programs and services provided by the Department of Human Services. We're also going to then move into some of the service providers who are, if the core is the homeless programs office overseeing all of the programs and services that are out there in the community, we're going to end with some of our outreach workers, the people who are on the lines addressing homelessness in our community. So we will actually have gone through a real tour of homeless programs throughout the state. We're going to have joining us also presenters from Big Island and Maui, because we understand that this is a statewide problem, not just a one county problem. With that, I'm going to turn this over to our BESD program administrators and division administrator, BESD division administrator, and then the homeless program administrator. First up is Mr. Scott Morishige, and then followed with, in tandem, Mr. Harold Rakeen. Go ahead, Mr. Morishige.
Thank you, Chair. So good morning again, members. Just to introduce myself again, I'm Scott Morishige. I'm the administrator of the Benefit, Employment, and Support Services Division. And joining me this morning is Harold Rakeen, the administrator of the Homeless Programs Office. So I'm going to start our presentation just with a general overview of the Department of Human Services, just to give you a bigger picture and then kind of narrow in a little bit. So for Department of Human Services, our vision is to see the people of Hawaii thriving. And our mission at DHS is to encourage self-sufficiency and to support the well-being of individuals, families, and communities in Hawaii. This drives will work in all four of our divisions. So DHS includes four main divisions, so BESD, MedQuest Division, Division of Vocational Rehab, and the Social Services Division. And then DHS also has three attached agencies: the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, Office of Youth Services, and the statewide Office on Homelessness and Housing Solutions, as well as four commissions attached to us. And the reason why I start off with this is, like the chair mentioned at the beginning, homelessness is really a statewide issue that requires a coordinated approach. So our division in BESD, although we're going to talk about our specific services, we really work in partnership with the other divisions and attached agencies within the department, as well as when we're able to with other departments within the administration. So just to give you a sense of BESD and what BESD entails, so we're the division of DHS that has a lot of the public benefits that people access, such as SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. We have financial assistance through the General Assistance Program, assistance for the aged, blind, and disabled, TANF funding, as well as employment programs through our SNAP Employment and Training and First to Work offices. We oversee childcare, both childcare subsidy and childcare licensing, as well as the low-income home energy assistance program known as LIHEAP. And we also house the Homeless Programs Office. So just a little bit more information about HPO. For those of you who've been on the money committees, the program ID for the Homeless Programs Office is HMS 224. So just so you're aware. And HPO really is responsible for administering a range of contracts to provide services to people experiencing homelessness as well as those at risk, to help them connect to permanent housing and to really encourage long-term stay in housing. So HBO doesn't provide any direct services. We work through our contracted providers, and those contracted services include shelter, both emergency and transitional shelter, homeless outreach, rapid rehousing, our Housing First program, which is a form of permanent supportive housing, housing placement, and civil legal services for people experiencing homelessness. HBO also works to provide homelessness-related technical support and assistance to our contracted providers to support them in the work they do. And we're also a member of the Hawaii Interagency Council on Homelessness. Again, recognizing that homelessness requires a coordinated response across multiple partners in both federal, state, and county level government, as well as the private sector. So again, this is just an overview of the different services that are contracted through the Homeless Programs Office. The majority of these services are funded through state general funds. However, we do have some programs that utilize federal funding. So our housing placement program is funded with TANF Maintenance of Effort funds, and we also have federal funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program, also known as HOPWA, as well as the Emergency Solutions Grant program. And to clarify, HOPWA and ESG, the state administers it just for the neighbor islands, and the city and county of Honolulu receives those funds for the island of Oahu, which is the bulk of funding available for those programs.
Can I just ask, and members, if you have a question, if we can interrupt.
Oh,
The funding for city and county goes directly to city and county?
Correct.
Okay, and then is that Emergency Solutions Grant ongoing, or does that end? Is that connected to CARES or any kind of like time-limited funding?
It's an ongoing form of assistance. Right now, we're in discussion with HUD about transitioning the ESG funding to go directly to the counties rather than to pass through the state. So that's something that we're talking to kind of take out the middleman, basically, with that program.
Okay, thank you.
So lastly, as far as a broad overview, I just wanted to share one of the key challenges in terms of administering contracted services. And that's, as you can see on the slide there, while the cost of services has increased over time, the funding for homeless services from the state really has remained relatively flat. The last increase in funding for HPO that we received was really in 2016, which is funding for new services. So it wasn't to increase funding for any of the existing services that we had. So for example, in 2016, the new funding we received went to support Housing First, rapid rehousing, and civil legal services component, as well as our family assessment centers, and also shored up some of the funding for homeless outreach. Between 2016 and now, really we've seen other costs increase pretty significantly. So for example, looking at data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, average weekly wages in Hawaii increased 36% during that time period. So in addition to that, we also know that costs for transportation and rent housing costs increased between 33 to 37% during that time frame. But basically the base funding for homeless services has remained level. And in addition to that, about 10.8 million of the approximately $29 million that HPO oversees is funding just for the biennium, so it's not funding included in the base budget. And so that makes it difficult to plan with the providers if you're not sure if the funding is secure. And the funding being in the biennium is actually something that's fairly recent. Prior to that, the funding was year to year. And so we've consistently advocated, if possible, now that these programs have been in place for nearly a decade, can we look at incorporating them to the base to provide a little bit more consistency for the service providers? One of the things that the department is looking at in terms of budget this year is to ask for an increase in the level of funding for homeless services to at least try to make up for the cost of inflation. In addition to increasing costs, we will know if you look at the 2023 statewide point-in-time count, it does show a slight increase over the prior year of 4%, about 250 people. So we just wanted to kind of note that, and we know that for the providers, it's very difficult to basically do the same level of work, the level of funding that going to you does not increase over time. And for us, if we were to try and look at giving deeper level assistance to one provider, it takes away from another line of service. So it's just one of the things that our homeless programs office and our administrator has to keep in mind.
Can I interrupt with a few quick clarifying
Yes.
questions? The 10.8 million on this slide, does that reflect the funding for the new services that have begun after 2016?
Yeah, so that's inclusive again of the Housing First funding, rapid rehousing funding, civil legal services, funding for the family assessment centers, and a portion of funding for homeless outreach.
So this might be unfortunate for others, but I recall the funding that we did in 2016, and a lot of that funding was because we weren't sure if these were the right solutions. But are you finding that these are part of the right solutions?
Yeah, I think that we need to keep these services in place because while the ultimate goal is placing people into housing, right, we also want to provide the support to help people navigate to that placement in housing. And the range of services we provide, going back to the prior slide, really provide that. Starting with outreach, that's how we meet people, where they're at in the community, right? Help them navigate them through the system, then take them into shelter if that's an option for them, right? To allow time for people to stabilize. And then we also have programs that move people directly into housing from the street, such as rapid rehousing, the permanent supportive housing program, our emergency grant program, and the housing placement program.
Okay, and then one last clarification on the slide that has the key challenges. So what we learned from the briefing on Monday was from city and county that we actually lost shelter space, state shelter space during the pandemic that has not yet been restored. Has part of that loss been because of these increasing costs that you've somewhat highlighted?
Not necessarily. The loss of the shelter spaces are because, so one, Next Step Shelter was in a space owned by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. It was always understood that that property would revert to OHA at some future point in time. So as OHA is looking at development of that area, we transitioned the shelter facility out of that location. We actually opened up a new emergency shelter on Eisenberg and Mo'ili'ili, the Keauho shelter, also administered by Waikiki Health, to sort of offset the loss of Next Step. So we opened Keauho as Next Step shelter was starting to wind down.
Yeah, including a transition plan that took 3 years.
Okay.
So we just didn't close Next Step Shelter. The transition slowly took place over a 3-year period, not to have an immediate impact or a significant impact to the community and to our providers.
Was that a bed-for-bed match between Next Step and Keauho?
Not necessarily, but I think that reflects the differences in how shelter services are provided now versus when Next Step first came up several years ago. So at the time when Next Step came up, most of the shelter space was congregate, right? So you're using large warehouse space, people sleeping in cubes or mats on the floor next to each other. And over time, part of what's come out is, there's more of a focus on non-congregate shelter, so using facilities where people can have almost like SRO units for shelter, give them a little bit more privacy and sense of space. So it's not necessarily person for person, but it is additional space to offset. And then we do work with the providers to try and move people through, right? And really focus on the throughput through shelter into housing.
Okay. And I might be,
And excuse me, sorry, Chair, but that's the importance of rapid rehousing, because that's a program that helps to get people out of shelter into permanent housing. And so these services are paired and work together. And every service that we administer and that we contract for has a housing first approach embedded in it. And I'm really happy to say that our outreach providers, they really get people from the streets into permanent housing. And in some areas across the state, they do better than some of the shelter providers in comparison to the data. So it's working where everyone has the focus on permanent housing.
okay.
And then for the second shelter facility that was lost, that was also due to a loss of the space. So the city and county informed us that that particular facility needed to be converted for use as a maintenance shed for the nearby Kakaako Waterfront Park when the city took over that area. So we actually are just now in the process of relocating the Family Assessment Center to the Leeward Coast. And it moved out of urban Honolulu in part because when we look at the data in the point-in-time count, we noticed there was an increase in the number of unsheltered individuals on the Leeward Coast. So we wanted to be able to meet the need when we relocated that facility. So we are working to offset those losses.
Okay.
But part of the challenge, right, is we're asking providers to basically do the same work while the level of funding remains flat. And I think that's the main issue to kind of keep in mind. As wages have gone up, other basic operating expenses such as utilities have also gone up, the level of funding has remained flat.
Go ahead, sorry.
This $10.8 million, that's, you said biennium, not recurring funds.
Correct.
Have you asked that that be converted to recurring?
Yes.
Where has that been turned down?
We've consistently, I think, since the funding was first appropriated in 2016, have asked for it to be incorporated into the base.
Where has that request been turned down? At the department level, at BNF level, at the legislative level?
It makes it into the department budget, and I think it's never received legislative approval. So the money committees have funded it.
It's been approved by BNF?
Yes.
So it's in the governor's budget
Yes.
for reoccurring?
I believe that's or right now it says biennium, but I think the ask is always, can we include it in the base?
No, okay, so where has the request that these funds be recurring been disapproved?
At the legislative level. So what happened?
So
and
it's been approved as reoccurring by BNF and the
Yes.
governor?
Yes,
Okay.
but currently it's funded only for the biennium,
Yeah,
and because we're
right.
in the supplemental year, the ask would probably come next year.
Yeah, okay. In terms of increase, whether it's called inflationary or whatever, have you made that request and how often? And where has that been disapproved?
So we did put in a request, I believe, last session, and I'm trying to remember if it made it into the executive budget request. Do you recall, Harold, off the top of your head? I don't believe so. Last year. And then we did make an ask this year, and it did make, I believe it will be making it into the executive budget request for this year, but at a lower level than the department had requested.
Okay. What's the difference between what you ask and what has been approved so far?
So the initial request was for a 20% increase, and I believe it looks like it will be in the budget at a 5% increase. So our request was for roughly 5.3 million, and I believe the amount that will be going into the budget is an increase of 1.32 million, which is about 5% of the overall funding.
Okay. Specifically in terms of the legislative denial of making the $10.8 million recurring, has that disapproval been on the House side, the Senate side, or conference?
I believe it's typically a decision made in conference. And I think as the chair had mentioned, partly what was communicated to the department is wanting to make sure that there was a consistent ongoing need for these services. But given, again, that it's been about 8 years since that funding was appropriated, I think that it is demonstrated that there is a need. It really supports the hard work of the providers in the community, and it's really part of the overall system that's needed to support the navigation into housing.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, so I'm looking at the 2023 budget worksheets, and it does look like it did make it into the governor's request, and it was a legislative denial. I also recall that part of the part of the negotiations was that there was a Senate had put it at 20% increase, and House position was 5%.
Oh, that's
Increase.
right. Okay. I'm sorry. As I recollect, yeah, the request for the increase did make it in last session. I apologize for that. The Senate did put it in at a higher amount. One of the other requests from the Senate is that we conduct an actuarial study to look at the need for increase in the cost of services, and the department is working on that now. We did provide information to an actuarial to do that analysis, but I think that's still in very early stages. So in the meantime, as that was going on, we also looked at just the costs, increase in costs over time, and that's, highlighted again on the slide, the 36% increase in wages. So even without the actuarial study, I think you can see that the operating costs for our providers really have increased during just even that 8-year period that we're talking about.
Okay. I'm looking at the next slides, and I think we probably have derailed you from the presentation, but just one last question since you did bring it up. The actuarial study is expected to be completed when?
I think it's still ongoing, so it's hard to give an end date. I think the hope is that we would get additional information by the time of the next session. But again, because of the level of information that needs to be considered for that, it's hard to give an exact end date.
Okay, thank you. And we'll follow up with this, but let's move ahead because I know that each of these programs that you oversee is very important, and you have some really good summary points for us.
Yeah, and I'll try to move through the overview because we also provided handouts that has a lot of the same information. But we just wanted to give, again, an overview of the range of services we administer. So one of the key services is our state homeless shelter program. So we currently contract 17 agencies, and that's for a total of 30 shelters, 15 emergency shelters, and 15 transitional shelters. The difference between emergency and transitional is emergency has the capacity to accept people just coming in directly from wherever they're at in the community, whereas most of the transitional shelter programs require a referral through the coordinated entry system that's administered by the respective continua of care. So either Bridging the Gap on Neighbor Islands or Partners in Care on Oahu. But shelter is really critical, as it shows on the slide, to increase stability for health, housing, and just social needs so that people experiencing homelessness are able to continue that journey to permanent housing. In our shelter contracts, providers must provide 24-hour access 7 days per week to the shelter facility. There's also emphasis on assisting individuals to develop a housing plan, to obtain the needed documents to move into housing, and to be able to obtain income, either through public benefits or employment. And part of the services that our shelter providers and their case management staff also provide is helping to identify and locate housing options for the people in their shelter facilities. Then moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, and I think you'll be hearing about a little bit later in the presentation, another service we contract is state homeless outreach. We have 7 agencies that we contract for the service statewide. And again, this is really meeting people who are unsheltered where they're at, connecting them to a range of services, whether that's emergency shelter, if that's appropriate, or directly to housing, one of the housing options that we have access to. And again, it's making sure that we're assisting people with locating those housing options, providing connection to other services and supports, and developing housing plans and helping them to increase their income, similar to what the shelter case management staff do. We also have a separate civil legal services program that's a part of our overall outreach effort, and we contract the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii for that, and that's really critical to help people get access to birth certificates, other identification documents, including marriage certificates, divorce certificates, that type of thing. Okay. And then, as we mentioned, we also have 2 family assessment centers we oversee. One is the Family Assessment Center on Oahu, which is in the process of relocating, and another is the Family Assessment Center in Puna on Hawaii Island. And the Family Assessment Center is a form of emergency shelter, but it's really different because I think we really are focusing on, again, making sure that we incorporate the housing first approach in the Family Assessment Center, that we have partnerships with other parts of our division. So in the Family Assessment Center, when it was in Kaka'ako, we had staff from our BESD division, from the eligibility part of our division, be able to come on a regular basis to the Family Assessment Center and provide connection to benefits. And other things, they also had partnerships with WIC and other services in the community. And then making sure that people have access to sanitary facilities, personal storage space, adequate clothing, access to a clothing bank, and so on. And then our housing programs that we mentioned, which are really so critical to this piece because they provide that support to help people transition, include our state homeless rapid rehousing program that we contract 5 agencies for. This is basically short to medium term assistance with rent, as well as the longer term case management and support, again, to help people with that navigation to housing, as well as some of their other needs. We also oversee state homeless permanent supportive housing, or Housing First program. The difference between this and the program that the Governor's Coordinator on Homelessness spoke about on Monday is our Housing First program is scattered site, primarily scattered site, although it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think it's how the provider chooses to implement it, versus the new permanent supportive housing pilot that the Governor's Coordinator's Office is working on, is intended to be more of a site-based or project-based permanent supportive housing program. And then we also have shorter-term programs, a state homeless emergency grant program that's operated by one agency, so that's Catholic Charities Hawaii, statewide. Participants must demonstrate a financial and emergency need, either directly related to impending eviction or that's a barrier to them accessing permanent housing. Then we also have a housing placement program that's funded by our TANF funds, and that is contracted with 4 agencies statewide. Then lastly, we administer the 2 federal programs for HUD, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. There's one lead agency, again, for the neighbor islands that we contract, that provides permanent housing placement with security, deposit, and ongoing rent assistance for people with HIV or AIDS. And then we also administer the Emergency Solutions Grant Program for the neighbor islands, and currently have, I believe, 3 different agencies contracted for those services. And ESG provides a wide range of services, including operational funds for emergency shelter, financial assistance and support services to prevent homelessness, and then financial assistance and support services for rapid rehousing. And then I just, as a, reminder about our Housing First program, Housing First is in state law in section 346, 378 of the Hawaii Revised Statutes, really outlining the principles of Housing First, which is not just permanent housing, but it's Housing First is the approach that we're generally taking to homeless services, that we really want to focus on navigating people into permanent housing as the end goal with very few preconditions or no preconditions, and really making sure that for our permanent supportive housing program we run under Housing First, that incorporates the following core components that are listed on the screen. And then we provide annual reports to the legislature regarding our Housing First program. And again, the Housing First program that we administer is just one of a number of different permanent supportive housing programs in place in the community. And then lastly, before we conclude our presentation, I really just wanted to underscore the support that Homeless Programs Office provides for our providers. So really having good communication, I think, is key. So we have monthly meetings with our contracted providers. This is something that we started, I believe, last year, Harold? And this enables better conversation between program staff and providers, allowing the opportunity to keep providers informed about key updates. We have an emphasis on continuous quality improvement, so looking at how can we provide feedback and services and getting input from providers to inform that process. And lastly, something that's been really critical for me is exploring opportunities for partnership across our division, right? So it doesn't lie solely on the shoulders of Homeless Programs Office, but really integrating them with the other offices under the umbrella of BESD. So an example of that is we've been working to connect our HPO providers or SNAP outreach providers in BESD, looking at how to bridge some of the other services we offer. And as an example, that graphic there is we provided briefings for the HPO providers earlier this year on some improvements to our eligibility system and our basically online portal where clients apply for benefits. We added a virtual agent or chatbot to help people navigate that system. And we want to make sure that information gets out to the HPO providers because embedded in many of those contracts is really helping people increase their income through connection to public benefits. So we're really trying to integrate the different parts of our division. And that concludes our presentation. So if there are any additional questions, we're happy to answer them or take them back if we need to. But thank you again for the opportunity to share what we do.
Members, I'm going to open it up to questions, but I do want to let Dr. Kelly, who's with us on Zoom, know that you're going to be up next. She's from Maui and going to give us kind of an overview of what's happening on Maui with the homeless programs. But members, we do have an opportunity to just focus in on what DHS just presented to us. So is there any questions? Go ahead, Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here, both of you. A question, you mentioned the Family Assessment Center is shutting down in town and relocating to West Oahu. Where exactly in West Oahu, and when do you plan to open it?
I'll defer that to Harold because he has the most up-to-date.
So we've been working closely with Catholic Charities Hawaii, and so they have a property out there that they actually was providing shelter services, and so they've transitioned those units to permanent housing, and some of the units needed some rehab, and so they're currently rehabbing units to be used for the Family Assessment Center out in Waianae. So it's going to be in the Maili area.
Is that the Ulu Kekukui?
No, not Ulu Kekukui.
Okay.
Previously Maili land.
Oh, okay, got
Yes.
it. Cool, thank you.
Yep, thank you. And it's anticipated to be open the beginning part of the next calendar year.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Representative Kobayashi or Vice Chair? Go ahead. I have a quick question. I really appreciate the range, right? And you start from shelters, emergency, transitional, to permanent supportive housing. Are your shelters able to deal with anyone who's in a behavioral crisis? Because one of the lessons we learned from last session, we were looking at the need for drop-in centers, behavioral health crisis centers. It goes by a number of names, stabilization centers. Is that in your book of business?
Well, they do. I mean, actually, they do without being compensated and without, at many times, having the right skill set there. And so our service providers they really do a great job, and they do the best that they can. So they deal with a lot of behaviors on a daily basis. Now, when those behaviors become very difficult and challenging to manage, they do elicit the help from HPD as appropriate. They do partner with others, but our providers need the support and need the resources to because as our providers and us and everyone as a system has done a great job of decreasing our homeless over the last 10 years, and now we're starting to see a slight increase. The focus is changing because we've done such a good job. The providers have done a good job with prevention, with preventing and diverting our homeless households. Now we really focus the most vulnerable in the community. And as we focus on that most vulnerable, we need different skill sets and we need resources to support it, whether it's nursing, whether it's mental health specialists, whether it's case management, it's clinical support. They need the resources to be able to have that skill set at our shelters where we could potentially expand or even support the providers to deal with what they deal with on a daily basis and may possibly increase their scope to take care of the population.
But I will add that I think that there is a need also for dedicated behavioral health step-down spaces such as group homes or other types of residential treatment facilities for people who have due diagnosis. Because partly, as people move through our forensic system, right, going to the state hospital and then exiting out to the community, there typically is a step down to different types of community placement, whether it's a 24-hour group home, 8 to 12-hour group home, so on. And that's different than emergency shelter.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to clarify that difference, and that I think there is a need to have dedicated sort of step-down housing for people moving through our behavioral health system. While that population sometimes goes in and out of homelessness, I think the needs there really are behavioral health focus, and having that dedicated support, I think, is something that's really critical, in addition to the continuum that we oversee.
Right, and our shelter shouldn't be seen as those drop-in centers and the catch-all for everything that's taking place in the community. That would be unfair to our providers.
Okay, and I really want to focus on when you said that we would need to increase the scope of your shelter programs to do that kind of behavioral health crisis work. It would be a new service, in fact, being added. They may be doing it spottily now, but they're not really contracted to do that.
No, they're not. It's a broad, the service specifications is broad, but it doesn't specifically focus on any, of the clinical or behavioral situations that you're, just,
Okay. I have one more question, but I do want to acknowledge that Rep. Amato is joining us via Zoom. So if she does have any questions, I will defer to her. After I ask my question, and I'll let her get prepared if she does have any questions for this group. My question is, you mentioned the fact that we have folks who are in and out of homeless programs offices. We have folks in and out of behavioral health, the forensics, the more clinical side, the incarceration side of the ledger. How are you working with Medicaid to ensure that your service providers are prepared? Because if Medicaid is successful in getting the waiver, are our service providers ready to assist? And I understand that they may not be, so I guess I want to know what are the potential places where we may need to support with technical assistance so that they can get up to speed, because we know the waiver won't really take effect for a year or 2 years, right, as we implement it. What is the status of your work with Medicaid?
So we have been working with MedQuest division with, Judy Moore Peterson and John Fujii from her staff, and we actually did a joint presentation with them at the homeless conference earlier this month. One of the main challenges, I think, as they ramp up their services is looking at the issue of duplication of payment or not having Medicaid funding supplant other existing funding. And I think the governor's coordinator mentioned that in his briefing on Monday. And so that is an issue that's come up in our conversations with MedQuest as well. But we are meeting with them on a regular basis. And as they get more information that can be shared with our providers, monthly meetings that Harold has with his staff are opportunities to share that back with the contract providers that we oversee. But we know that MedQuest is also doing their own direct outreach to the community in partnership with the health plans.
Okay. Rep. Amato, if there's any questions, I'll see if you're going to come online. Oh, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. I don't have any questions at this time, but incredibly informative. It seems money is always the sticking point, isn't it?
Often.
Representative Takanuchi has a question.
Sorry, this increase that we're talking about for the budget, that 20% increase, is that just to kind of, because there hasn't been an increase in so long, is that just to kind of keep the service providers going, or is that going to equal to like an increase in services also?
I think the intention is to maintain the level of service, so not necessarily to increase the range of services being provided, because I think the core issue, for the providers, right, is we're requiring them to do the same work, with no change in funding, right? So we need to account for the cost of inflation and the increase in just operating costs over time.
How much more would we need if we wanted to increase?
So again, our initial ask for the budget was 20%, I think reflecting what the Senate's ask was, and kind of looking at a middle point. Like, we know the increase, at least according to some of the metrics we're looking at, is 36%, right? But we also know that we need to have a balanced approach to the budget. So I think we looked at 20% as a happy medium. And then, when Budget and Finance did their review, I think it was adjusted down to 5%, just in light of, the limited availability of general funds, right? And I think that's always a concern, is how do you have that balance?
So that 20% is kind of just to, I guess, in a sense, get people whole again to what we've been doing with all the increases and inflation and everything.
Yeah, I think, again, we're still waiting on the results from the actuarial study, right? But when we look at the data points we presented, generally it looks like there's been anywhere from like a 33 to 36% increase in just different metrics, depending which metric you're looking at.
Thank you.
So just to follow up though, to increase services, I mean, you're having to look at, the sky could be the limit, but even if we wanted to do, I think it would be worthwhile to engage in a little bit of conversation. What would it take to bring on another agency, or to ask an agency to maybe increase their services by 10%. I don't even know what is a reasonable ask, but for session, perhaps you could kind of price some of those things out for additional services.
Let me share a little bit. So our service providers, with our funding being static, right, and no increases and the level of funding remaining the same, what we've done as a program office is in our contract negotiations each year is negotiate the work plan. And the work plan in each of our contracts is the projected number served. Unfortunately, over the course of the last few to several years, we've seen a decrease in those numbers projected. And so the offset, so where we aren't able to afford additional funding, our contracts is showing a decrease in numbers served because that's the trade-off. That's the one thing, that's the one variable that we can negotiate. And so the 20% may get us back to a point where we was previous to the increased costs and those decreases in work plan numbers. And then I don't know what and how much it would take to actually increase what they already do.
I think just to add one other point to that, we need to, when you're looking at the homeless service system, right? The homeless programs office is not the entire system. We have statewide office on homelessness and housing solutions. We have MedQuest division. We have the counties. And so I think it's looking at the resources coming online through some of those other partners as well when we look at, how do we grow the larger pot of available services, right? So as SOHHS, for example, builds out Kohala and some of the other things that they're working on, there may be some efficiencies that we see in the services that we provide, right? As people start to receive services from some of those new programs that are being innovated and developed now. And again, as MedQuest continues to work on the Medicaid waiver and getting some of the new things that they're potentially looking at, that will also potentially result in some efficiencies in the services we oversee. So I think it's just keeping that in mind as well.
I think that's a great point, and it actually highlights why this last slide is so important. It's the constant conversations you folks are having so that,
Yeah.
and it comes back to some of the things, the blending and braiding of resources, the coordinating of services, the fact that you guys are all, it's a whole of government approach,
Yeah.
really. Okay. Before we move on to, go ahead, Representative Kobayashi.
Okay, your first priority in terms of budget would be to get this 20% increase.
Yeah, I think looking at having, the budgeted amount for the services reflect more of the true cost of the services, yes.
So that's a yes.
Yes.
So your first priority would be to get this 20%. And we're now hopefully talking about 5% being approved and will be in the governor's budget to the legislature. So we're essentially talking about like a $4 million difference between the 20% and the 5%.
Correct.
Okay. And then secondly, to the two prior questions, if there were additional monies for increase of services, that would be second priority. But you haven't given a number.
Well,
I mean, this is how I talk to people.
yeah.
And I've said this dozens of times. If you ask for zero, you're guaranteed what you ask for, zero. So you're saying you don't know what the number is if you had to increase services. So I can guarantee you, as of right now, you're going to get zero.
So I think the main focus is stabilizing the funding that we have.
Right,
Getting
yeah,
the
that's
portion
first
that's
priority.
funded in the biennium in the
Yeah.
base, and then also having more of the true costs being reflected in the budget.
Yeah.
I think also, like I said, we're continuing to have these discussions with other parts of government, how we can see improved efficiencies. And I think once we realize that, then we're able to kind of focus on, well, how do we grow what we have, right? But the first priority really is stabilizing what
Right.
we have and making sure we can ensure more stability, not only for the people we serve, but for the providers doing that critical work as well.
So actually, your first priority really is to convert the $10.8 million into the recurring category. Then your second priority would be to increase that 10.8 by 20% to cover inflation. And then your third priority would be additional monies for increase of services.
It's just not the 20% on the 10.8 million. It'd be the 20% increase on the total
Overall,
amount.
yeah.
So we have,
Oh.
yeah, we have little over $15 million in recurring, and then the 10.8 on that. And so the 20% would be the on the total of that
I
amount.
see. Thank you.
So what I have is your priorities is the 20%, 5% recurring, and then any additional funding.
Yeah.
All right. Before we go to Dr. Kelly, I do want to note that we received from you handouts on the various service providers divided by the grants, and we'll be making sure that our members get this because I think this is a very, very valuable resource, as well as the description. And then, of course, the presentation will be made available to the public as well.
Thank you, Chair. And so the description matches the phone list, the phone numbers. And so the descriptions is in the same order as the contact information for those programs.
That this is fantastic, and I also appreciate that it's also divided by service region. So it really highlights and will help all of our members identify what are the agencies that they can help and partner with as they do their work in their community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly, are you ready to go? I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, sorry, it looks like I'm in the witness protection program. The way my lighting is. Can you see me okay?
We can see you okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Scott and Harold were saying, just from a service provider perspective, as far as the need for increasing that 20%. As a service provider, when you can get a job at a hotel paying $25 an hour as a front desk receptionist, our outreach average salary was like $15 an hour. Why would you do this very difficult work in outreach for $10 less? And how are you even supposed to sustain a living or a family if you have one? It just is near impossible to recruit and or maintain dedicated employees when that's the compensation that we're able to provide according to the current budget. So just wanted to kind of echo that. And then also I did prepare just some data. Brandy, who I believe is going to go after me, is going to talk about the programs that we offer. So for the sake of not being redundant, we have the same programs. I thought I'd let her go more into that. I can share some of the data I have for Maui and Kauai, and then I'm sure you all have questions about Maui and the impact of the wildfires. So I thought that would be the order in which I would approach this. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And can you see okay, or do you have video blocks in front of it?
We can see this. And we see
Okay.
it with the sidebar showing, but it's fine.
Let me minimize the sidebar then. Okay. So just overall, these are some of the population served. This is all the neighbor islands combined. So 5% are U.S. veterans, 11% are Kapuna, 59% have lived in Hawaii for over 20 years. 4% have lived in Hawaii under a year. And I think that's an important statistic because on some of the islands in particular, I know in Kauai, there's a perception that a lot of the homeless population are due to what we call homeless tourists or people who fly to Hawaii to escape the weather on the mainland. But so I feel like that's an important statistic because it kind of negates that perception. 29% are children. 42% are keiki under the age of 5. 65% are families led by a single mother, and 24% are families with minor children. So these are the metrics that matter. So total people served and a breakdown of each of the neighbor islands, Hawaii, Maui, and Kauai. I'll just pause here. I won't read all the numbers for you, but I'll give you a minute just to absorb that. Before I go to the next slide, can you guys see this okay? Do you have any questions?
I'm struck by the successfully remained housed for 2+ years. Those seem like really good numbers. But subsequently, I would ask, like, the 20% that is more difficult to house. I would just put a pin in that and wonder, what is it more that we can do to help that are not remaining housed?
Mm-hmm.
Members, any other things? No. Go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
Okay. So this is our point in time count for Maui County since 2015. In Maui County, we have consistently had a decline in our point in time count since 2015. You can see from the numbers represented here. And then our unsheltered number this year decreased while our sheltered number increased. For Kauai County, our total point in time count has increased, including, I mean, all of them really. The sheltered count increased slightly, but you can see those are some drastic jumps in our unsheltered and total homeless. I will note that Kauai County is the only county that does not really have a supplemental budget. So we receive funding for programs such as outreach and rental assistance for Maui County. And I know Hawaii County receives county grants for that as well. But Kauai County, we don't have any county funding for our services. And I think it's really reflected in the data, the impact of that. Our Maui County demographics, I'll just give you a moment to look at this. The CH is for chronically homeless. So the red is the chronically homeless population. That light blue is the non-chronically homeless. I think the rest really speak for themselves with the definitions you can see there. And then I'll show you Kauai County demographics. So one obvious difference that jumps out at me when you look at Maui versus Kauai demographics is just the difference in the unsheltered versus sheltered. So I just wanted to share just kind of some of those data points with you. And then, like I said, Brandy will cover some of the programs that we offer. So for the sake of reducing redundancy, I'll let her speak to those things. As far as the impact of the Maui wildfires, I don't think the data I just showed you is going to really reflect the impact of those fires yet. And if I can just be real with you guys, I've spent a lot of time turmoiling over what I'm going to share. And so I just thought I would share with you our heart, and I'll try not to cry, but it it's very difficult in Maui right now, and everything feels so political. And so even like sharing what our needs are, it comes with a bit of hesitation because it seems like there's a tug of war. And meanwhile, like Family Life Center, we are in the trenches with people. We just hired 6 individuals who were displaced from the wildfires to provide disaster case management services. And literally, one of the individuals I was interviewing, she told me that she was being evicted from her Airbnb that day and had no idea where her and her 3 kids were going to sleep that night. And yet she was sitting in my office interviewing to see how she can help, how she could help those other people that were displaced. And so it's just, it's been a lot. I keep saying this is a disaster. And as the words come out, I think, we had a disaster, but I feel like we're reliving a disaster like every week because the chaos that is going on, everyone is doing the best they can, but the impact of these fires was so huge, the impact to our county. And then there seems to be some conflict between the county and the state. And that's where I really, wasn't sure what I could share except for the fact that we have people who need homes and we don't have homes. And so we've got to solve that problem. And their stories are real. And a lot of times it seems like this disaster becomes a platform for self-promotion or I don't know, just people maybe even well-intentioned wanting to help, but without really connecting with the stories or the people, the faces behind the disaster. So one thing, as we're getting into disaster case management services, we are hiring only people who are displaced because we've seen a significant difference in the impact when you reach out to someone who lost their home and everything in the fire, coming from someone who's in the same place. And so that shared experience, it lends just natural trust. They can actually say with authenticity that they know what they're going through. And there's a ability to lend that trust and the advocacy too, being genuine and really trying to help get them to a place of as whole as we can be made. Versus, providing services with others who have not been directly impacted. And I would say directly impacted, like everyone on the island, everyone in our state's been impacted in some way. But those who literally lost everything or loved ones, that experience is what's really critical. And those are the ones who really have the needs. So like myself, for example, I did not lose my home. I lost a business, but when I meet with people, it's not the same level of impact as when one of my staff members I just hired who lost their home, lost their business, lost their neighbor, their friends, and they reach out and extend the same services. Family Life Center is also erecting midterm housing. I believe we're the only ones who've broken ground. And we started the day after the fires and planning this. It's been, just a journey, and trying to get everything we need to open up the doors and get people, into the housing. We have over 700 household applications for this one, community. There's 88 homes. Those 700 applications represent about 1,700 individuals, 700 children. And we just started going through the data and decided to prioritize multi-generational families. We have 30 households that are multi-generational families. And in our community, Ohana Hope Village is designed for multi-generational families. And what we're realizing is those large homes are going to be very hard to come by. And without some housing resource for these large families, they're going to be split up. And so we've decided to prioritize those large families to keep them together. And we are hiring those that were displaced to provide the property management. But again, it's just been, everything feels kind of like a political battle and just the tug of war. We're fighting for people to have, even though it's temporary, a midterm roof over their heads. So I don't know. I'll pause there. Let's see, I know that wasn't a very technical topic with data or anything, but I wanted to share our heart. Let me share, if I can, one story. When the fires first happened, we started trying to find our clients in Lahaina that were missing, and just trying to locate everyone and make sure everyone got out okay. And there was one family who they were homeless in 2018 because they lost their house in a fire in Lahaina in 2018. She was a single mom with 5 children. We were able to locate her. She lost her home, and her kids, went through that a second time in these fires. So they lost everything twice. And just seeing the children, and what struck me is that she has like a 4-year-old daughter, and I went to visit, and she said, just very matter of fact, almost like they were numb or in shock, we lost everything in the fire. And to hear just a little 4-year-old share that, just like it was, just common, because everyone they're surrounded by is lost everything. And so we started thinking about her when we're building this community, and how do we provide housing that's safe and secure for a single mom with 5 kids. People were talking about setting up sheds and communal bathrooms, and that's why we really prioritize private bathrooms and safety and security for our families. So anyway, sorry, I'll stop blubbering, and I'll give you a moment to see if you have any questions or any comments.
I don't have any questions. I'm looking to my colleagues if you have any questions or comments. And then I do have a comment. And before I turn it over to Representative Kobayashi, Dr. Kelly, I just want to thank you for joining us. And there is no need to have technical data for this committee. This is a committee that's listening and wants to hear the stories. My hope is that we can depoliticize some of this by focusing on some of the base funding that will then allow and empower the service providers, your workers, to be able to do that kind of work with the community, that it's so important. Because we do know that you are on the front lines, and we do know that the challenge of the wildfires has just escalated the experience on Maui Island. So I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, because this is going to be what's going to take us into the session and help us kind of center the conversations, and the fact that we need to shore up the services that you folks have been providing. I do have one question. Can you speak to whether you lost any, when you say you lost a business, did you lose any shelter space in Lahaina specifically? Or did any of the service providers lose actual space to the fires in Lahaina?
Yeah, that was my personal business that my husband ran that we lost. It was a car rental business. But there were shelter space that was lost. KHAKO lost a shelter, and Salvation Army also was lost.
So we're looking also to the need to make sure that those businesses, those service providers are also assisted in some way as we move forward with the wildfire conversations and this, the recovery process. I see Representative Amato's hand raised. I'm going to go defer to Representative Amato first, and then Representative Kobayashi. Go ahead, Representative Amato.
Mahalo, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, for your sharing your experience with us. I have a question. So I represent South Maui, and of course, every day when I drive by the church, King's Cathedral, I see the domes. What are those domes being used for, if I may ask?
Yeah,
and what is the cost?
No, I get asked this question all the time. The domes are actually not part of Family Life Center's response. That's something King's Cathedral's doing. I know the domes were donated to the church, and the last I heard, they were going to use them for business space for people who lost businesses, like barber shops and things like that. That's all I really know about the domes. Our project is across the street. We're using a product called Continest, which are the foldable homes. They're made of steel, and we're also assembling them with an enclosed lanai and a private kitchen and bathroom unit. So ours are kind of on that 10-acre lot just across the street from King's Cathedral.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, if I may. About how many square feet are those, and how much did it cost to pop one up? And how many do you currently have?
So our community, if you go to ohanahope.com, you can check out all of the architectural renderings, the plans, everything for the entire site. It will have 88 homes. We put 2 Continest units together to make a larger living space for families. We did dedicate 25% of the community to Kapuna, and that the Kapuna units are just one single Continest unit. I will share with you that one Continest unit retails at about $30,000. They sold it to us for a loss, at a loss for $16,000 each. And then the kitchen and bathroom units were building on site through Hawaii Trust Systems. And the community centers are being assembled with shipping containers, and Hawaii Trust Systems is building the connecting roof. Our last budget analysis, originally we were estimating the entire project to cost about $19 million. We were trying to do it all with privately raised funds. So far, we've come up with about $4 million, and just did a budget analysis and realized about $5 million in savings in donated materials. So our total budget right now is about 14 million. So we still need about 10 million to complete the entire project. Part of the reason for the high cost is the land is ag land and had no water or sewer. So we are installing septic systems. The water has been a point of contention. There is actually water on the site. It's owned by A&B, and we've not been able to get authorization from them to use their water. So we had to go to the county. The county's giving us access to a water meter on Ho'okele, which we have to do horizontal directional boring to connect to. And so that's a lot of the cost, is just the infrastructure. Did that answer your question? I could keep going on and talking all day long about Ohana Hope Village. It's like I do it from 5 a.m. until about midnight every night.
That was very helpful. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, I know. Please repeat the website again. ohanahope.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Later.
Representative Kobayashi, question.
You spoke about the need to bridge the gap between $15 for your outreach workers and $25 for a hotel front desk receptionist. Would the 20% increase that we were talking about earlier bridge that gap?
I believe that it would. I will tell you, Family Life Center, we did an equity analysis, and we went ahead and increased our staff's costs to try and be at least, it's just under mid-range for what the national average is for social service work like this. And so we were doing that with private money that we had, which a lot of our private money has now been poured into disaster relief. And so I think having that 20% would definitely help. We saw a need
I understand that part about the 20% will help. But will the 20% cover the gap, the entire gap between $15 per hour and $25 per hour?
I would have to sit down and do a budget analysis to see. I think it would get us close. We couldn't bring our staff up to $25 an hour currently. So to pay for that delta and what's budgeted with our state programs, I don't think it would bring us quite to being whole, but it would definitely get us very close.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brandy, you're going to be up next, and I don't know if you're able to share yours, but we also have the slide presentation here. Okay, Brandy's got it. Go ahead, Brandy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kelly, for sharing your heart and your experiences on Maui. I did prepare some slides as well. as you can see with Dr. Kelly's slides, we have very similar dashboard images because you can find that on for Maui, Kauai, and Maui counties. You can find our data like these images at btghawaii.org. Our contracted provider, Kamana Onahelu of our shared database, creates these dashboards for us to share out. So she did share, Dr. Kelly shared Maui and Kauai. So I just wanted to just briefly share with you Hawaii Islands data. This is our homeless point in time count. You'll see the increase of homelessness in our total homelessness, and our unsheltered is the one in pink. So we're at 725. You'll see a slight increase in sheltered homelessness, so the little decrease from 22 to 2023. There was a slight increase in shelter beds during the COVID years because of the CARES funding, but as those programs and funding went away, then some of the shelters closed down, and one in particular is the Kalamaku, which is in Kona. It's was an 18 unit shelter. So you'll see those numbers also decrease as we decrease shelter beds. Just like with Dr. Kelly, this is one of our dashboards, so you can see as our total homeless is at 1,003, our chronic homelessness is at 32.5%, and our individuals are showing here as 67.5. Veterans, unsheltered, or individuals, head of households. When you look on the left is the individual household. On the right, you'll see the family data. Shared across the neighbor islands on Maui, Kauai, and Big Island, our family homelessness numbers are decreasing, but it's the focus and intention in our individual households that keep increasing year after year. When we talk about the data, really the data behind these are the stories like Dr. Kelly had shared of people who are experiencing houselessness in our community. We're talking about 341 children that are under the age of 18 here on Hawaii Island. We'll see a majority of our demographics and gender and race here also on the screen. We'll see quite a bit of multiracial and Native Hawaiian. You see at 653 or Pacific Islander. And the core programs that both Maui, Kauai, Family Life Center, and Hope Services provide, we're a contracted provider for homeless outreach services. So that's our team of staff who are on the streets day in and day out, working typically over 40 hours just to help people who are houseless, living in their cars, under the bridges, on the streets, providing assertive engagement, outreach services, developing housing plans, trying to meet them where they're at, meeting their immediate needs. Oftentimes that's just offering them water and something to eat before they even get to talk to us about what's happening with them. We're advocating for housing with them. We're helping them get connected to transportation if they're looking for work, if they're looking for help with housing search. We're helping them get document ready, which is what we mean by that is getting them their IDs, their birth certificates, getting them connected to SNAP benefits and TANF or Social Security. These are the team members that are out there on the streets connecting to the community that is there. Oftentimes are relied on the county governments, HPD, county parks, state parks, DLNR, where the frontline, that group that your organizations or agencies are calling to for assistance in helping those who are in the bushes, in lava tubes, under the bridges, on the side of the Wainaku River, wherever they're working on enforcement, they're asking us to show up to offer help. And that alone takes up time that we're not contracted to do through the Homeless Programs Office. And that's often a struggle when we're spending a lot of time helping to respond to community calls, because those calls are going to our mayor's office or the police and they need to do something. We communicate back that moving them and enforcing them from place to place does not work. And it's really tiring on the outreach workers and the clients that are being asked to move from place to place with no identified space to move. That is heartbreaking, that is tiresome, and that is not effective in working towards a pathway to moving into housing and getting them housed. So no, that's an added stress on top of what we're really trying to do is help them move into a pathway of housing that potentially also can help break trust, especially if they see us always showing up because we're asked to do so by our government partners when they're doing enforcement. For Hawaii Island, our challenge and our struggle when you talk about social services and outreach, and most especially, is the geography of the island and the mass and land mass of the 4,000 square miles. So while we're not able to assist folks like have higher caseloads, it's because we're spending time on the road getting to these areas. These are be mindful that in rural community like Hawaii Island is time. So getting to Hilo to Kona, hour and a half maybe if there isn't any traffic or any accidents. Going around the islands like 4 hours. So going to particular from Hilo to Ka'u is like an hour 15. Hilo to Honaka'a is like 45 minutes to an hour. Hilo to Waimea like another hour. So I say from Hilo because that side of the island is currently the most affordable place to live and where we can hire and recruit staff. Our challenge is finding workers who live in the other areas because it's higher cost in housing. And like Dr. Kelly had mentioned, their businesses, right? The hotels, the resorts on the west side, they're offering $25 an hour, and we're competing, for the same workforce. Since COVID, that has been the hardest to hire and recruit for. Right after COVID, there were lots of people who were laid off, so we had workers, we could open up additional shelters. Now, just to maintain the current shelters, our biggest challenge is recruitment and retention of the staff. As Dr. Kelly and Scott mentioned, it's the cost and that bridge and that gap of paying a wage that is equitable. We were able to apply for county funds for the west side of the island in order to increase the pay on that side. Hawaii Island's funding, the supplemental funding right now is sunsets at 5 years. So we're right now going into our second year come next month, but we're still in our first year of supplemental funding. When we talk about the impact of how many people on a given night of who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness, you see the number here is 725. We have 9 outreach workers. And while folks want to go into shelter or get into housing, we're limited in the amount of shelter beds we have on island. And prioritizing people who are at the highest needs to get into shelter. One of the new programs that we did start, we started during COVID by hiring a registered nurse with the CARES money. We were able to find private funding to continue funding the private nurse, the registered nurse. This year, we were able to subcontract out Dr. Koyanagi, which you may know from on Oahu. He's a community psychiatrist that does prescribing hope with IHS. He flies out twice a month to like Big Island to do psychiatric street meds with us. So basically engaging with people on the streets, assessing their wounds. When he comes on site, our staff is able to refer and make a connection on those who we believe that also needs additional psychiatric help. Yes, there are programs that provide that help, like with the insurance providers, but the connection to get into Medicaid programs is what's key. And I think you had mentioned about what's key to getting additional, the chronic homelessness to get into housing. This was one of those interventions that we're piloting to see if this approach will help to get those who are not accessing care for behavioral health services because they're not walking into clinic, right? So we're trying to bring these services in our rural community as you may be aware, specialists in our community is very rare to come by, hence why we're contracting out Dr. K from Oahu to do that work.
Brandy, before you move on, and
Yes.
is this an area where the assisted community treatment orders is needed and help is needed to be able to get these folks through legal services so that
Yeah,
they can?
that is what we're working on next. We just executed our contract for our grant and aid. So thank you for supporting us with that. And with that grant and aid, we will be piloting the assisted community treatment in consultation with IHS and getting their help. And one of their staff moved over from Oahu to Hilo. So we're also helping to bridge that and working with Dr. K. So that is next that we're piloting. But we need a legal partner. We need to coordinate with our judiciary partners, prosecutors, public defenders. So that work has yet to happen. But we just did execute our grant and aid last month. So we're recruiting for staff and hope to launch that in 2024.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The other programs, so outreach is helping them into shelter. So we manage 7 shelters on the island. Most of them are funded by DHS Homeless Programs Office. Others are by private funding. So we are located in Hilo, Pahoa, and Kona. So we manage on any given night 168 beds per night, 365 days a year, 7 days a week. Outreach and emergency shelter are essential workers, are essential services. So during COVID, these are the team and staff that couldn't just telework and work from home. They had to show up every day, not knowing what was going to happen because we didn't know much about COVID in the very beginning. So how to work with that. So as you could see in the earlier picture, we were like in the whole PPE, like astronauts in the beginning. But know that this is the group we depend on to stay open, to help people to stay sheltered, even when they themselves are at high risk in putting themselves out with this kind of diseases. Oftentimes, the Homeless Programs Office contract doesn't pay for the entire cost of providing these shelter beds. We do have to look for other funding to supplement the total cost of running these shelters. Some of these shelters, so like this one in particular, is Hale Maluhia. We have women, we have couples, and we allocate 1 apartment unit for medical respite. So one of that way to help supplement the total cost is to allocate a partnership and start a partnership this year with Hilo Medical Center. So we've been running a medical respite for about a year. Hilo Medical Center pays for the cost for when unhoused patients are exiting out of Hilo Medical Center, that they have a place that they can heal and recover. Typically for people like us, we're housed, right? We'll go home, we'll have antibiotics, and we can heal under our roof. The hospital is saying that they are not in need of hospital care. They don't need to be hospitalized, but they would benefit from a place where they can still keep their wounds clean so it doesn't get reinfected, that they can be assisted into the shelter services. So this is one way of our pathway to get them into housing so we can capture those who are exiting out of the hospital. These are projects that the insurance providers, that even Kona Community Hospital is interested in. Again, it's for Kona side, it's capacity, it's trying to recruit and find staffing, especially at the pay that we offer for our staff members. And then just capacity in general, just looking for workers, even on the Hilo side, to do more. This property is Kealoho. It was started with Ohana Zone funding. There's multi-level, so downstairs is the emergency shelter, which is our men's shelter in Hilo at 44 beds. We also have a contract with U.S. Vets, who is the grantee with VEA, to do Hoptail, which is an emergency shelter for veterans. And then upstairs is a permanent supportive housing program that was also funded through Ohana Zones, and now being funded by county supplemental funding and other federal funding. Ohana Zones is not a long-term funding source. So even though we can start up programs, we're having to look from the time we open how we're going to sustain these programs to continue these projects after Ohana Zones ends. So we have 18 rooms upstairs that we converted to permanent supportive housing. So basically, those are folks who are chronically homeless, who has been homeless for a very long time and have a disabling condition. This emergency shelter is in Hilo. It has 31 rooms. They're single rooms, they're private rooms, but shared kitchen and showers. The county about 2 years ago also upgraded the kitchen to a certified kitchen. And this is also the site where we're contracted by U.S. Vets to allocate 5 beds for unhoused veterans. So all of these shelters, again, are managed by usually 1 or 2 staff members. So I think there were conversations earlier about the worry of duplicated of funding. So here's what happens in the shelter, right? So you have 1 staff person, say for 20 households. There's a conflict happening in 1 corridor of the building. That 1 person has to go deal with the crisis while there's, the other 18 families roaming the shelter. So there isn't a duplicate of services because where this 1 person who has a behavioral health crisis, the shelter worker is able to call the CIS worker and say, hey, can you come and provide additional support for this person who has a eligible mental illness and is enrolled in CIS? They were on the streets, now they're in shelter, we're getting them on a pathway to housing, but it provides the extra support that the shelter needs because oftentimes it's just 1 or 2 staff persons who are running the shelter because that's what our contracted budget can afford, all right? So these other supplemental resources helps to ensure the safety, 1, the safety of our staff and our clients, but secondly, to help them move on a pathway to housing. To expect 1 person to do all of these things. So yes, the scope of work is to do all these things, but to expect 1 person, a navigator, to do that and manage the crisis that's happening at the shelter can pose difficulty, can pose risk, can pose a risk to safety.
Brandy,
So
can I ask a clarifying question right there, just
Sure.
because I want to make
Yep.
sure that our members understand. When you say the shelter worker calls the CCS worker or the CIS worker, what you're talking
Yes.
about is the case manager overseeing the Medicaid
Yes.
project. Okay, so that's
Correct.
how the services are blended and braided in this
Yeah.
particular situation. Okay.
Yes, because there are other case managers that the shelter resident may be connected to. Could be CIS, could be CCS. That's another insurance program. Could be a community-based case manager with Mental Health Kukua, which is a program connected to Adult Mental Health Division, CBCM. So there are people who are connected to other services that are staying in the shelter. So CIS is also one of those support services that provides that type of case management for people who have these disabling conditions.
Are you seeing that the case managers are more coordinated, or does there need to be better communication?
No, well, if you're talking CIS in particularly, with the new team, like led by John and Vic and Alana, this past year in 2023, there's been huge improvement. One of my other slides in next is to talk about CIS.
Okay.
So we're in it like about a year and a half in now. So when we average out that collection, so we're talking about funding, it was about 65% collection. But if you just look back in the last quarter, we're at 75% in collection, meaning getting paid timely and reimbursed for the work that we do. That's another challenge. Fronting costs for these services and then waiting for reimbursement. So that's a challenge in the CIS because it's insurance billables. But as organizations looking for ways, how do we manage cash flow and timing to make sure if those things do not get paid, then it poses a risk of us being able to do these things. So that's one of the fears for organizations like ours as we're going through this new journey of becoming Medicaid eligible organization, is how do we operate like that when insurance is not paid timely. I will go more into that. This particular slide is just like with Dr. Kelly, they're venturing as a new housing developer. We did that too. We went from a homeless provider to now we're a housing developer. We're being part of the solution and not just finding housing in the rental market and leasing up, but also building. So we just celebrated a grand opening earlier this month in purchasing, we purchased 12 modular housing units with HPM Building Supply and our resource center. That this is what it looks like. And we'll be welcoming in seniors and targeting seniors for this project out in Pahoa. This is the property we were able to purchase with private dollars. It's the same property as the picture above, which is the micro units. There's 20 of them. They're 10 by 12 that were built during the Kilauea lava eruption in Pahoa by community, for a community that was displaced by the lava eruption. So just really through that relationship with the community, with HPM Building Supply and local licensed contractors, started this private partnership. And hey, what else can we do, Brand, to help with your community? You know, it's like, help us build housing. We need housing in our community. So this is that pilot project where you see a couple of the pictures on the bottom. We have additional land. We did use private funding also to bring in a housing developer so that we can continue to build housing. But while we're building, we know that takes years. These projects like Rapid Rehousing and the Housing First permanent supportive housing contracts with HPO helps us to get as part of the connection of the continuum, right, from outreach to shelter, not getting them into housing, or outreach directly into housing. But this is a critical piece. I know there was discussion earlier, like, do you think it's working? You need this piece to connect them to housing, right? So outreach is focusing on getting them ready for housing, searching, but they can then do a warm handoff to work with the landlords. That's a different skill set. Recruiting and building and nurturing relationships with private landlords, offering them incentives, right? So we're in a tight rental market. Why would a private landlord rent to someone who's high risk versus someone who is at no risk, better credit, no criminal background history, has not burnt bridges with others? So we need that team to also connect with our landlords. That team also nurtures the landlord once the family is housed as well, right? You need a person that they have a point of contact 365 days a week, 7 days a week, that just to have that reassurance for the landlord that they can call somebody about, this tenant. So that's what Rapid Rehousing and Housing First does. Is provide those case management and supports, not just for the family, but also for the landlords in the community. Because once we burn bridges with landlords, we too would get axed out, and then that prohibits our future placement in looking and securing additional future housing for our families. So it's really key to have that team to work with community. Any questions so far? If not, affordable housing. So these are all our housing sites. So we manage between Rapid Rehousing and permanent supportive housing. Some is clustered in a particular area. So Halikikaha is 23, Halikulike, which I mentioned in one of the shelter upstairs, is 18. Then there's scatter sites within the private rental market. And then one of our newer interventions for those who are still stuck in our shelters, they're unable to secure housing in the community. We started master leasing units in the community. What that means is that the landlord is willing to test us out as an organization. They're not quite there in leasing up directly with other tenants, the people that we serve, but they'll lease with us. They'll lease with us because we're willing to take the risk of the organization. So we'll put on our property insurance, our general liability insurance. We become the tenants. And then the owner allows us to sublease it to other tenants, which is the people we serve. So we currently have 12 of those throughout the community, providing that when they're unable to find and secure housing on their own. This is the slide about the community integration services and CIS. So as I mentioned below, or earlier, below I have that bottom slide. So it does say 65%, but that's our year and a half in, and we average it. Look back in the last quarter, it's at 75%. But if you drill it down by insurance payers, we have one insurance payer that's at 97% and really performing high, and that's Ohana Health. And so they're the organization, we tell this to Medicaid, to MedQuest office, that, you know, they're the organization that's really easy to work with. We get paid timely and there's no hiccups or issues, and we're able to provide those supports to these individuals who are eligible, who are homeless, have a severe mental illness, have a medical issue, and or have a substance abuse issue. So it can work, but these are some things that I just wanted to bring forward as we think about, you know, what's the fear and how do we scale that up is because it's cost reimbursement, right? So when we're working with Homeless Programs Office, we actually get paid prepaid for the quarter. So we have cash flow, money in the bank, and we can draw down from our bank. This way we're fronting costs. Organizations may have to pull out a line of credit, or you got to fundraise for it or get private dollars in order to even start this program, because there are costs like having an electronic health record, finding a professional to do insurance billing claims, because we don't know how to do that in-house. We don't have that capacity. So you got to go find that capacity outside. So there are these kinds of costs when trying to move or to assist homeless services into this insurance payers arena. But if you look back, like the lower performing insurance payers, we have others that are like only paid us 25% and 36%. So know that that's the challenge when working with different insurance payers, because it's not only learning about how to get credentialed with MedQuest, but now we got to learn how to get credentialed with each insurance payer, and each insurance payer had all their different contracts and agreements. So know that that's a huge learning curve for organizations new to this work, especially the ones who were grant funded with Homeless Programs Office. So it's a huge learning curve. So building capacity, creating systems. So like bringing in these specialists were from private dollars, and then case management was through CIS, but that's a huge learning curve. And part of that that work is now being done by MedQuest. That new team I mentioned earlier is helping with the specialized teams, but others is really just reaching out to other organizations doing this. And for us, that's been IHS. So reaching out to them and how do we help to develop these infrastructures and these systems so we can provide these services in our rural communities as well. So some challenges and lessons learned. I think I've shared some of those already, but as we've learned through COVID, through lava eruptions, through Tropical Storm Iselle, and also with Dr. Kelly in Maui, is continuing to work with urgency, continue to be flexible at state funding, and we've already heard others. Scott and Harold mentioned the increasing in funding, and the example they gave was like with the emergency shelters that I gave earlier, and also the pay. But like Scott mentioned, they have been communicating, especially during COVID, and still have communicate that. So just continue to do that, as we often feel on the neighbor islands we're left out of communication, but that hasn't been the case with Scott and with James and with Harold. So I think that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Brandy. We will have your presentation, and I appreciate that you highlighted some of the challenges with Medicaid. As we were looking, as I opened up, we are hopeful that Medicaid's Section 1115 waiver will be approved, and that we can move and continue to do innovative things, and that there will be time for service providers like you to ramp up. Members, any questions? Or if we could shift to our last presenters, and then Brandy, please stay on, because I think we'll have some Q&A at the very end for everybody. Members, the next three presenters, I want to invite Cambria to come up first. These are going to round out our presentations, and I think for me, I did attend this homelessness and housing solutions conference perhaps a month ago, and was so impressed with the presentations by these next presenters to really speak about what is happening on the ground. As outreach workers, engage, do the work that we contract with them to do, the difficult work that we ask them to do to make sure and to help address the persistent homelessness program, or homelessness problem on the streets. Cambria is from, and I might be butchering your name, Cambria is formerly an outreach worker, but now is working with Partners in Care as in the Oahu Landlord Engagement Program. So, Cambria?
Hi, good morning. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Cambria Vance. I'm currently employed with Partners in Care and work for the Landlord Engagement Program. Before that, I was an outreach worker with IHS and assisted with the detox and stabilization beds in my last year with them. About 9 years ago, I was homeless at the Aloi Boat Harbor. I faced many challenges while homeless, and a big one was realizing how different people treated me due to my circumstances. People look at you and treat you less than. People would often walk by and say things under their breath, or just look at me with disgust or like I was a criminal, which I think played a huge role in why when outreach specialist Justin Phillips first outreached to me and treated me with kindness and respect, it made such a huge impact on me. Here was this stranger who genuinely cared and wanted to help. I remember it like it was yesterday. He sat with me and Uncle Clarence, the uncle who kept me safe while I was homeless. He gave us snacks, water, and just had a conversation with us. He asked about our lives, how we became homeless, and what immediate struggles we were facing. I remember explaining to him that my stuff kept getting stolen out of the empty boat lockers I was storing it in since it was not secured. I didn't think much of it, and then the following week, Justin came back, and he returned with a lock for me and shoes for Uncle Clarence. It was clear that he really cared, and he listened to what we were going through, and then brought things to help our situation. Having a stranger care about my situation woke me up. It gave me the drive to put effort into changing my circumstance, and Justin continued to check in and follow up until I was off the streets. For me, the most important and impactful thing an outreach worker can do is listen, care, and treat the clients with kindness and respect. When I started outreaching, I realized quickly that having a set schedule and being consistent with clients was beneficial. For example, I would outreach Diamond Head every Thursday and climb all the ridges that had encampments, which is about 6 different ridges. One client had been living up there for 15 years, and when I returned with his EBT card, he cried and said no one has ever followed up long enough to help him obtain EBT. After about 6 months, the clients got used to my consistency and started coming down the mountain and would be waiting by the parking lot for me. They would constantly tell me that over the years, outreach workers would stop by once but never come back. Following through with clients is a very important part of outreach. If you say you're going to do something or be somewhere, it is important to follow through, as a lot of this population has been let down multiple times in the past, and just showing up builds trust and rapport. I think outreach can improve by hiring more outreach workers, paying them better wages, and creating an outreach training program. When I started outreach, I was thrown in the mix and basically just learned as I went. I feel it would be very beneficial to have a training program and support the outreach workers and ensure the same skill and knowledge across the board with every agency's outreach team, as well as creating an exit plan for when outreach workers are leaving their jobs. I had a team member who was leaving, and she created a file with all her clients. It had pictures of the clients, what they were working on, the location they were usually at, where they were at in the housing process, and what their housing plan was. This ensured that her clients did not fall through the cracks, and our team was able to continue where she left off with her clients. I also feel it would be very beneficial to have outreach workers equipped with tablets and hotspots so they are able to complete assessments and enrollments directly into Clarity from the field. This would eliminate having to complete a paper assessment in the field and enter it into the system later in the office, freeing up the worker's time and effectively capturing the client's location with the new future in Clarity. I also want to mention how important it is for outreach workers to be supported by their team. Outreach can be mentally draining, and implementing team bonding and R&R days is very beneficial. It's important the office is a safe place for workers to debrief and get additional support. I want to circle back to Uncle Clarence. He not only kept me safe while I was homeless, but many other women over the years as well. He has 7 daughters and always said he would hope someone would do the same for them, as he has seen how dangerous it can be for single women on the streets. When I started outreaching, I would check in with him every Monday. He loved living on the beach, waking up to surf, giving tourists lessons, collecting recyclables, or going diving for taco. This was his way of life, and he had no goals of housing. Then COVID hit, and his way of life shifted. There were no tourists to give surf lessons, no recycling to collect, no food to dig out of the garbage. He was getting ticketed almost daily, and he began getting robbed and attacked for what little he did have. That's when he started accepting services and wanted to work towards housing. We started with EBT, then obtained his vital documents, a state ID, and got him his Social Security income. Then with the help of Teamwork Hawaii, he was housed at the senior housing on Young Street, where he pays 30% of his income for rent. With the consistent follow through and being there when he was ready made all the difference, and I'm happy to say that after 23 years of homelessness, Uncle Clarence has now been successfully housed for a year and 7 months. For me, everything came full circle, being outreached by Justin Phillips, then having him as my manager when I started outreach, to then housing Uncle Clarence. It made what I went through have a purpose, and I'm forever grateful.
Thank you, Cambria.
Thank you.
I want to open it up for any questions. I'd invite you to sit if you wanted to move over, and if we can invite Efren and Malia, and I believe also Sarah, or did we also? Sarah Alamut. Members, these are also workers who work with a very specific population in our homelessness system. They work with homeless youth and also did a presentation at the conference this past month or so. But I think we often hear, and we've talked about other subpopulations in previous presentations, single adult males, families, but this one is really focused on youth services. And this group of presenters are going to be speaking about some of the programs that they offer, as well as what they see on the street, talking about the experience of outreach workers for youth services, and then hopefully identifying some of the gaps that we see that probably mirror some of the gaps for adult services generally, but may have some very specific characteristics and challenges because this is with a different subpopulation. So I'll turn it over to Efren.
Aloha. Thank you so much for having us. This was originally a 45-minute presentation, so we're going to try to squeeze a lot of information in, but please feel free to stop us if you have any other questions. So my name is Efren Barones. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator at the Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah. I'm with Hawaii Department of Education, the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program.
And my name is Malia. I'm the Outreach Supervisor at Halekipa's Youth Outreach Drop-In Center. So we can start out by talking about my program. Like Efren mentioned, we're going to try and breeze through a little bit to keep it short, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Youth Outreach is a drop-in center located in Waikiki. We serve youth under the age of 22. There is no minimum age. The services that we provide are outreach and drop-in. Outreach is super important, like Cambria was sharing earlier, particularly with youth. Youth have a healthy distrust of adults. The reason they're on the streets is because adults have shown them they are not trustworthy, they are not safe. And so outreach provides an opportunity to work with our young adults and establish ourselves as trusting, safe adults in their lives. Drop-in, on the other hand, is where youth come into us. Some clients may never come into drop-in, though, so again, I want to emphasize how important outreach is. We're open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from 3 to 6 to avoid encouraging minors to skip school to come to YO, so we provide our services later in the day. We meet basic needs like showers, providing food, storage. We have a computer lab, hopefully to be used for GED or job searching, but they are teenagers, so there's a lot of Facebook use and watching YouTube videos in there. We also provide higher level needs like housing case management, receiving benefits, and goal setting.
So my program now, I work at the Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center, and our mission statement is reducing harm, promoting health, creating wellness, and fighting stigma in Hawaii and the Pacific. And I think it's first really important to note that when we talk about houselessness, it's kind of an intersectional thing. It intersects with criminal justice, HIV and Hep C prevention, mental health, and substance use. They kind of are all interconnected. So I'm going to share about our Guide on the Side program and as well as our mobile crisis outreach team. So at the Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center, we have a Guide on the Side program, and we specifically focus on LGBTQ youth, 18 to 24, experiencing homelessness on Oahu. And what's really unique about our program is oftentimes funding for homeless services providers is really strict. So this funding is allocated for outreach services, this funding is allocated for when you're in the shelter, and this funding is allocated for when you're housed. And with those different allocations comes different team members and different people in those youth lives. So our program actually allows us to stay with the youth through the whole process. So we can stay with the youth when they're on the streets, when they're housed, when they're incarcerated, when they're in a mental health facility. We are allowed to stay with them through the whole process and until they're 25. And this is just a brief snapshot of who we serve so that you all can kind of see what our program is and the youth that we're serving. So we currently have 77 youth enrolled. And I will say that our program was actually, and our grant was approved for 50. So we're operating at a much higher capacity than what we were meant for. 39% identify as just Native Hawaiian. 36% have a mental health diagnosis. 60% use substances, and 59% have experienced domestic violence, the majority of that being familial. And then we also have our Kua'ana project, who we work with, and that is a transgender peer navigation services, and they also help us with our trans youth as well in terms of gender affirming care, name changes, things like that. And so how do we offer these services? A lot of it is bringing and meeting the youth where they're at, so that's going onto the streets. So we have mobile medical clinics, and we try to make anything that we offer at HHRC available in person on the streets, or at least telehealth, so that includes psychiatric services as well. So next, we'll hit on our mobile crisis outreach team. So what we did is the youth providers realized we all have the same goal and we all have the same vision. So why do it so separately? So we actually were awarded a grant through HUD where we were able to form the mobile crisis outreach team. So that's between RISE, Residential Youth Services and Empowerment, HHRC, and Halakipa. And we run a mobile crisis phone, which is on 24/7, that any houseless youth who's in crisis can call, and they can get information and navigation to resources. We do outreach together as teams 3 times a week, and we do 2 pop-ups a month around the whole island.
So next is a little bit about the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. It is authorized under the McKinney-Vento Act, which is a federal law that supports the identification and immediate enrollment of students experiencing unstable housing. We do this through a few different ways. We have about 17 liaisons across the entire state. We also have somebody focused on early learning, as well as myself, who is focused on re-engagement or dropout prevention. Go ahead, yeah. So in the school year 22-23, there were over 3,000 students that were identified in unstable housing. So in addition to the HUD definition of homelessness, we also identify students who are doubled up.
Next, we're going to discuss how is working with youth different.
So sticking with the education piece, so what studies, thank you so much. Lots of research has shown that lacking a diploma is one of the greatest correlating effects to young adult homelessness. Every school transfer sets students back up to 6 months. So when students are unstably housed, they frequently move a lot. Oftentimes they move 6.5 times more than their housed peers. Students who are homeless are 87% more likely to drop out of high school. And youth with less than a high school diploma or GED are over 300% at a higher risk of being homeless in their adult life.
So a lot of it is that we do as a team, as youth partners, is we utilize harm reduction. And a lot of that is making sure that the youth voice and youth choice, so that all of our plans, all of our programs, the youth is in charge and they get to make the plans. Oftentimes our young people are stuck in institutions and systems that give them no power. and we choose to give them power and uplift them to make their own decisions. Peer support, I myself am within the age range and have experienced homelessness, so we're very intentional on hiring and making sure that our young people see themselves within their staff and their teams. We create LGBTQ-focused programming specifically for our communities. Consistent engagement, as was said before, it's really important to consistently be out there and to hold your commitments and really try to meet them where they're at. Sobriety is not a requirement. We do not have any expectations of our youth. We meet them exactly where they're at in any situation. And then they can utilize any of HHRC services when they are enrolled in our program. This is just an example of another way that another role that we have is to create community within the youth, homeless youth program. The biggest reason we see youth fall out of housing is because they're lonely. It's because they're taken out of their homes, which sometimes is beaches, out of their communities, and they're put into a one-bedroom apartment by themselves. So this was a drag event that we had where our youth were paired with drag queens, and they were able to perform and explore artistry, and we had 55 youth attend. And we do a bunch of different events. So this month we're going to Zoo Lights. We go to movies. We also held a Thanksgiving dinner last month. So we always are trying to do things that promote community so that when young people transition into housing and are plucked out of their communities, they don't feel alone.
Just to summarize these two slides, the important thing about working with youth, as we continually emphasize, is recognizing that at-risk youth have been involved in systems for most of their life. Maybe they've been involved in the criminal justice system, and they are generally desensitized to people telling them what to do and listening in an effective way. And that's something that we want to be sensitive to rather than something we use to label them as bad kids or non-compliant, those sorts of words that you hear thrown about. So having trauma-informed rules and youth-friendly case management involves working with your youth and being humble and aware that you need to earn these youth their respect. A lot of times something that I see happen when people start working in youth services, maybe transitioning from working with adult services, is, oh, these youth are younger, they need to listen to me, I'm older, I have more experience, they just need to do what I tell them to do. And that really just doesn't go over well because these youth, as I mentioned, have been taught that adults are not safe. Adults are not there to care for them. Adults are not there to provide them with the best options. They're there to abuse them, take advantage of them, hurt them. And so providing youth-friendly case management is really paying attention to the youth voice, being aware that because they're at risk, they have had to mature at a much faster rate than your quote-unquote average youth. And we need to respect the fact that they have experiences that are valuable to listen to and work with them as we provide solutions to move forward.
So next we're going to kind of highlight some of the gaps in services that we currently have and that we see as youth providers within the system.
So I'll start off with the definition of unaccompanied homeless youth, and that is any child that is not in the physical care of their parent or legal guardian. And that can happen for a variety of reasons, as you can imagine, whether their parents are involved in services, maybe the children are looking for another safe place. For example, we have a lot of children who are doubled up and couch surf rather than remaining on the streets with their families. System involvement, disagreement with lifestyle choices, pregnancies. There's lots of reasons that children are not under the care of their parents or legal guardian.
So these are just a few of the things that we believe need to be worked on. Unaccompanied minors really deserve access to education. So right now, we understand that the McKinley Veto Act does give clear guidance that houseless youth do deserve an education. But where we have run into issues is when youth have a runaway status, the schools don't really have any guidance around that. A lot of the principals will just call the police and will not allow our runaways to receive an education. And so that's something that we believe needs to be provided clearer guidance on.
That can be very dangerous. You can say why that could be very dangerous when children are not in school.
Yes. Well, we actually have a story later on that we're going to share.
Thanks.
Sorry. So, yes.
Jumping ahead.
Yes. So, minors deserve the right to shelter. So, there was minors' right to shelter did sunset earlier this year, and it reverted to the old definition of what a provider was and who could house a minor. And since that, we have seen a sharp increase in houseless, unaccompanied minors on the streets. mainly because the resources right now require referrals to CWS or HPD, and obviously those are institutions and systems that our youth do not trust and do not feel safe. So realistically right now, when we get a referral from the DOE or when a teacher calls and says there's this youth whose parents aren't letting them go home, there's nowhere really for them to go. The best we can do is give them a tent, and then they can come into a drop-in center and they can have food and eat and have at least a safe space, but there's nowhere for them to actually shelter in place where they can feel safe themselves. And then minors deserve the ability to consent to healthcare. This is something that's really important and personal to me. When I was growing up, I was not in a safe space for me to be out and open. And so in terms of like ability to consent to care such as PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, I did not have access to those services. I also had to be really careful because of confidentiality. My care wasn't protected as a minor, so I could consent to getting STD and STI testing and treatment, but my doctor could theoretically have called my parent and let her know, or insurance could have listed it on a bill, and my mother could have found out that way. So I had to save up money out of my 16-year-old self, my job at Whataburger, and pay out of pocket for my STD and STI screenings and treatment as well. And in terms of pre-exposure prophylaxis, I was putting myself at risk to get HIV when that is completely preventable and completely safe. And minors can consent to certain cares such as abortion and mental health care, but that also is kind of at odds right now. We had a minor come to drop in a few weeks ago, and Queens refused to service her even though she had a gash on her leg that was obviously infected because she was a minor. So in terms of servicing minors with general health care and preventative care, that's where we see a large increase of growth that we really need to focus on. So this is also a really great time to have this meeting because November is National Runaway Prevention Month. And in 2022 HPD Performance Report, there were 1,968 juvenile arrests. 1,057 of those were because of their runaway status. So the majority of the juveniles that we are arresting and who are going through the criminal justice system today are due to that runaway status. So this is Danny. This is the story that we're gonna share. So Danny is a senior in high school and wants to go to college and pursue a business degree. He really values making others happy and dreams of working in the hospitality industry and running a hotel. Danny is a high-achieving student taking classes such as trigonometry, Japanese, and entrepreneurship. During the summer, prior to Danny's senior year, he has a falling out with his parents. He moves in with his sister, but was reported as a runaway. The police were called to campus multiple times to interview and release Danny into school custody. This cycle continued for several months. Even with these challenges, Danny was determined to graduate from high school. Danny eventually stopped attending in person and continued to turn in his assignments via Google Classroom. However, the school administration declined to accept his work while on runaway status and required a parent letter to excuse his absences. The Education for Homeless Children and Youth hosts a youth circle to learn more about Danny's goals and challenges and offer space for family mediation. Here, Danny shares his thoughts of helplessness and worthlessness. He shared contemplated giving up, devastated he was no longer able to be in school. Even with much advocacy on behalf of the liaisons and the EHCY team, due to the lack of clear policy around educating runaway youth, Danny was not able to return to school. Danny vanished and stopped replying to his liaison's messages. A home visit revealed Danny's grandfather sent him to the mainland to live and work in construction with an uncle. In the summer of 2023, Danny reached back out to his liaison. Danny shared the day after his 18th birthday. In the fourth quarter, he returned to his school of origin and stated that the runaway case is no longer valid because of his 18th birthday. Thanks to his previous academic achievements, he was able to successfully graduate high school once he turned 18 and the runaway status was taken away. So these are the HPD procedures to do when a runaway is reported directly from the HPD website. So they are put into the Juvenile Justice Information System. They're created a file. And then an outstanding juvenile runaway shall be removed from the JJIS file when the assigned officer informs the Communication Division's personnel that either the juvenile was under arrest for the runaway offense or the runaway case is closed. So that means that they can only get that status taken away if they turn 18, if their parents take away the status, or if they're arrested.
So to conclude, we just wanted to have a little encouragement, like discussion about getting outside of what we feel is necessary. Abolishing these types of systems and organizations, it can feel overwhelming, but we really want to get outside of what we've been stuck in. So we're trying, I know that we are suggesting options that can sometimes feel a little bit unordinary in terms of when we talk about minors, like I mentioned, a lot of the mindsets is kind of, oh, they just need to do what they're told, they need to go back home. But again, we're talking about minors who are involved in really unsafe and unhealthy situations at home, and reunification is not always the safest option for them. So, sorry if we can go back. Offering minors more rights and more autonomy can help with, rather than keeping us within the same sort of systems that aren't really working, getting us outside those. And it's also investing in individuals instead of investing in systems. So we may not all be on the same page right now with what minors should have the rights to do, but if we can at least consider some reforms, or I really like the term non-reformist reforms, which is just a fun way of saying we don't have to have a binary of reform, staying within the same situations and systems, or revolution, which can be overwhelming, doesn't go beyond the talking phase, there's not a whole lot of buy-in, but just trying to consider some new opportunities. So I just had 3 points on hopefully things that we can all agree on. 1, arresting minors is traumatizing, acclimates them with the criminal justice system at a young age, and teaches them to identify as criminal. 2, the foster care system is traumatizing and is linked to futures of homelessness, incarceration, and substance abuse. And 3, like I mentioned, re-engaging with family is not always a safe option, particularly if those problematic behaviors are being taught in the household. So if we can reimagine what we think is necessary, why does being a runaway need to be a criminalized issue? And 2, why are the only options for minors foster care or reunification with the home? Can we maybe get outside of those usual conceptions and consider something different? Thank you.
I think we did a good job of smushing it.
You did an excellent job, and I actually appreciate Ms. Alimutu for joining us. I don't know that I saw this entirety of this presentation, but I think you folks have given us a lot to think about, a lot of the gaps that we might have. I do want to open it up to questions. I want to note we're a little bit over time, so if we maybe could have another 10 minutes, and I want to invite any other questions to our other presenters who might also be in the room still. Harold, I know, is here. I see Harold. But questions from committee members for any of the presenters who are still here? Questions? Representative Kobayashi.
Is there any existing legislation that has already been introduced for rights to minors?
So there are in terms of like shelter, or in what facet?
Well, I mean, you talked about 2 of them, right to consent to medical care and, I guess, yes,
Yeah.
right to shelter.
Yeah. So minors have very certain things that they can consent to for healthcare. So that's mental health care, abortion, treatment of STDs and STIs, but it's not really preventative care. So that would be like PrEP. It would be considered a preventative option, or things such as like the monkeypox vaccine. And also they don't have the right to consent to general health care. Which is kind of odd. So like my client who had that gash on her foot, that's considered general health care. So hospitals.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to find out if somebody has already proposed something that's already on the books, or not on the books, but, in the pipeline.
I believe we have, PrEP for minors specifically has been in the discussion for a while, and I do believe it's going to be in the.
Okay.
To at least address the preventative health aspects.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and then in terms of minors' right to shelter, the legislature had an expanded definition of what a provider was for the past 3 years, and that did sunset, I believe, in June of this year. So that has now reverted back to what the old definition of who could house a minor.
We will continue to look at that. We really need to see the challenge here is, I think you've been listening to, we're subject to so many different rules and regulations. I appreciate that you say we need to look outside of the systems because the problems are existing. The sharp increase of runaways and youth on the streets after we let that legislation lapse is very concerning, very concerning. It means they're not probably going to school. They're not getting connected to services. They're just made more vulnerable because there's nowhere for them to go. I appreciate, again, the presentations, the work that you all are doing. I will let, any final questions? And then any closing remarks? If you could say one last thing to this committee, I'd invite Cambria if you wanted to say anything, or any of the four. And then Harold, if you might want to come to the table and make any closing comments, because this is going to actually round out our briefings on homelessness specifically. The committee is going to turn its attention to mental health moving into December and into January. But this really is the opportunity for your last closing remarks before we head into session on homelessness programs and services generally. So Efren?
Oh, yeah. I would just encourage, as we move forward, to encourage legislature to look into youth-specific programming. Just a note, 40% of chronically homeless adults report being homeless as a youth. So it's also preventative to invest in youth homelessness programs and youth prevention as well. There's also very little youth prevention programs. And in terms of our other islands, outer islands, there's actually no homeless youth programs on the outer islands as well. So those are things that I would encourage the legislature to look into.
I'm going to interrupt your closing comment. That was very noticeable. It's your only project is on Oahu.
Yes.
Okay. Cambria?
I just want to say thank you for having me and letting me share my story, and just remind everybody that, outreach plants that first seed. And so it's so important to have, good outreach workers, more of them, good pay, and sufficient training.
Thank you. And Mr. Burkeen, Harold, anything you want to say?
Just thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share. And looking forward to the upcoming legislative session. I think you folks have pointed it out that the 10.8 is critical to, get into the base, get it recurring. And then, of course, the increases. And I think the stories, the information that was shared by Brandy, by Dr. Kelly, and everyone here really speaks to, stabilizing the funding and then increasing the funding. So I look forward to, working with you all during the legislative session, answering any questions. It's been a lot of information that was shared. If there's questions and any information we can provide, after we all had some time to think about this, please don't hesitate to reach out. Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burkeen. And thank you, Brandy and Dr. Kelly on Zoom. Thank you to all of the partners who have come to the table to inform this committee about the good work that's being done and the gaps and the obstacles and challenges that we need to continue to address. On that note, this Committee on Health and Homelessness is adjourned.